They said it was under control. It wasn't. What really happened at Chernobyl was hidden for 36 years, until the tapes were finally revealed. In April 1986, Soviet state television broadcast a brief, sterile announcement. A minor accident had occurred at the Chernobyl nuclear power plant. The situation, they insisted, was entirely under control, casualties minimal, and the surrounding areas perfectly safe. For nearly 4 decades, this sanitized version of events stood as the official historical record, championed by leaders like Mikhail Gorbachev, to assure the world that the Soviet apparatus had handled the crisis with quiet efficiency. But hidden deep within state archives lay hundreds of hours of raw, unedited film, shot by military conscripts and state-sanctioned documentarians right in the blast zone. These reels sat entirely unseen for 36 years. The unearthing of these tapes shifts the focus away from the reactor's technical failure. These reels provide a direct, unedited record of a government choosing to protect its global image while its citizens were systematically exposed to lethal radiation. On the morning of April 26, just miles from the smoldering reactor core, children played in the sunlit streets of Pripyat. Families shopped, couples married, and normal life carried on without a hint of panic. While the residents enjoyed the warm spring weekend, highly radioactive isotopes were silently raining down over the city, settling into the soil, the water, and the air they breathed. The authorities in Moscow were already tracking the soaring radiation levels, yet they chose to keep the city completely open, delaying the evacuation order for nearly 2 full days. The captured footage shows families smiling into the lens, enjoying the spring weather, while their government watched the radiation sensor spike and chose to stay silent. The recovered audio recordings capture the voices of young Soviet conscripts arriving at the site. They joke on camera about their daily rations of vodka, believing the radiation is a minor hazard that the alcohol will somehow wash away. Their actual assignment was a death sentence. Armed with little more than shovels and crude aprons fashioned from scrap lead, these men were ordered to manually clear chunks of highly radioactive graphite from the roof of the exploded reactor. Initially, the state tried to use advanced remote-controlled machines and lunar rovers for this task, but the radiation fields on the roof were so intense that they fried the microchips and instantly disabled the robots. Because the machines failed, the military command made a chilling calculation. They deployed thousands of human beings, referred to directly as bio-robots, to sprint onto the roof in 2-minute, highly lethal shifts. The footage leaves no room for debate. When the expensive technology broke down, the Soviet state simply replaced it with its own citizens, treating human life as a cheaper, more expendable resource than technology. But the real horror wasn't just the explosion. It was what happened after, when the truth was deliberately hidden. This chilling record exists largely because of Volodymyr Shevchenko, a Ukrainian filmmaker who brought his camera crew directly adjacent to the open-burning reactor core to document the containment efforts. When you watch his surviving footage today, violent white blotches and heavy static randomly erupt across the screen, briefly obscuring the men working in the rebel. Those visual tears are not a developing error. They are the physical signature of iodine radiation piercing the camera body and chemically burning the celluloid film stock inside. The environment was so saturated with alpha and beta particles that the film absorbed the toxicity. Shevchenko absorbed it too. He died of severe radiation sickness less than a year after capturing these images. These reels exist as a physical victim of the meltdown, scarred by the same invisible force that claimed the filmmaker's life, to show us the truth. Away from the reactor, overflowing local hospitals held the grim reality that Moscow's official reports omitted. First responders and plant workers were arriving with skin melting from their bones. Within the recovered audio testimonies is the voice of Lyudmila Ignatenko. Her husband Vasily was one of the first firefighters dispatched to the burning power plant. Despite intense warnings from medical staff about the danger of proximity, Lyudmila, who was pregnant at the time, refused to leave Vasily's bedside as his body succumbed to acute radiation syndrome. The cost of her devotion was devastating. Lyudmila survived the exposure, but her newborn daughter lived for only 4 hours, having absorbed the fatal dose of radiation while still in the womb. The ultimate burden of the cover-up fell on grieving Uyghurs and unborn children, exposing the state's secrecy as an intimate, multi-generational crime. Eventually, the horrific truths documented in these suppressed heaps began to leak into the wider Soviet consciousness. Citizens realized their leaders had knowingly sent young men onto a radioactive roof in lead aprons and systematically lied about the medical devastation unfolding in their own hospitals. The social contract was entirely broken. That profound betrayal ignited a wave of anger, sparking massive protests across Ukraine and throughout the Soviet republics. The citizens demanded transparency, and the government had none left to give. This state-sanctioned betrayal poisoned public trust as much as the soil, fueling a chain reaction of dissent that accelerated the Soviet Union's collapse. Today, the exclusion zone stands as a massive paradox. What was designed to be a sealed, irradiated graveyard has unexpectedly transformed into a thriving cradle of rewilding nature. Life persists here with stubborn endurance. Packs of wild wolves roam through the decaying infrastructure, and a small community of elderly women, known as the babushkas of Chernobyl, illegally returned years ago to live out their days on their ancestral land. Long after the state apparatus that caused this disaster faded into history, the forest continues overgrowing the concrete ruins, proving far more resilient than the empire that tried to tame it. Governments can bury their sins in concrete, and they can lock their failures away in cold archives. But as those recovered tapes and the returning forests prove, the truth eventually forces its way to the surface. The reactor exploded in seconds, but the consequences are still unfolding today. Not just in the land, but in the trust that was lost forever. Because sometimes, the real disaster isn't what happens, it's what gets hidden. If you found this story important, subscribe for more deep, untold histories